Muirfield Village was supposed to feel untouchable. This was not just another stop on the PGA Tour calendar, not just another property with grandstands, sponsored tents, and perfect fairways carved into Ohio soil. This was Jack Nicklaus' house. The Memorial Tournament was his creation, his legacy, his way of building a stage where golf's past and present could stand in the same sunlight. But in 2025, something was missing from that stage, and everyone could feel the empty space before anyone said the name. Rory McIlroy was not there. The reigning Masters champion, the man who had finally completed the career Grand Slam, the player who had just climbed one of golf's tallest mountains, chose not to come to Muirfield Village. On paper, it was a scheduling decision. In reality, it felt like a signal flare shot straight into the heart of the PGA Tour. Because when a superstar skips an ordinary tournament, people move on. When a superstar skips Jack Nicklaus's tournament, golf starts asking uncomfortable questions. The timing made it even louder. This was not a weak field begging for relevance. This was a loaded memorial, a signature stage with elite names everywhere, a tournament built to feel too important to ignore. The purse was massive. The history was real. The host was the greatest major champion the game has ever known. And yet, the biggest postmaster story in golf was not about who showed up, it was about who did not. That is why the absence hit differently. Rory did not need to say anything for the message to travel. His empty locker said enough. His missing tee time said enough. His decision turned a quiet scheduling choice into a public measurement of power. For decades, tradition told players where they were supposed to be, but now one of the biggest names in the sport had reminded everyone that the modern superstar answers to a different calendar. And somewhere inside that silence was the warning. If Jack Nicklaus's event could be skipped, if Muirfield Village could lose one of golf's brightest stars, then the PGA Tour was staring at something bigger than one missing player. It was staring at a future where money, history, and respect might no longer be enough to guarantee that the biggest names walk through the gate. Jack Nicklaus did not need to shout for the warning to shake the room. That is what made it so powerful. He was not standing behind a microphone trying to start a war with Rory McIlroy. He was not attacking the modern player, not demanding loyalty, not begging for respect. He simply admitted that he was surprised. And in golf, when Jack Nicklaus says he is surprised, the entire sport knows something has shifted. Because Jack is not just another tournament host. He is the standard every generation has been measured against. 18 major championships, a career built on discipline, respect, and showing up when the moment demanded it. So, when Rory skipped the memorial without personally telling him, the issue became bigger than a missed phone call. It felt like the old rules of golf etiquette had been quietly rewritten, and that is where the real tension lived. Nicklaus understood Rory's decision. He knew players have families, schedules, pressure, and bodies that can only handle so much. He knew that after winning the Masters and completing the career Grand Slam, Rory's world had changed overnight. But understanding something does not make it harmless. Sometimes the most dangerous warnings are not angry. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in politeness. That was the part everyone needed to hear. Jack's reaction was not about ego, it was about meaning. If the Memorial Tournament, with Nicklaus as the host, Muirfield Village as the stage, and a loaded field waiting, could still be passed over by one of golf's biggest stars, then the PGA Tour had a problem hiding in plain sight. Tradition had not disappeared, but it had lost some of its power. For decades, the sport believed certain events were protected by history. Players came because the legends mattered, because the handshake mattered, because being there said something about your place in the game. But Rory's absence forced a brutal question into the open. In the modern PGA Tour, does legacy still command the room, or has the superstar calendar become the new authority? And Jack Nicklaus may have been the first one to realize how serious that question really was. The PGA Tour did not create signature events by accident. These were not normal tournaments with a new logo and a bigger trophy. They were built as a response to chaos, built to protect star power, built to tell sponsors, broadcasters, and fans that the best players in the world would still gather in the same places under the same banner for the biggest weeks outside the majors. The Memorial was supposed to be one of those protected stages, but Rory McIlroy's absence cracked the glass. On paper, the system looked strong, a massive purse, a limited field, no cut, elite names everywhere, the kind of setup designed to make skipping feel almost impossible. If you were one of the best players in the world, this was where you were supposed to be. The PGA Tour had taken tradition and wrapped it in money, structure, and status. It looked like a safety net strong enough to catch every superstar. Then, one of the biggest stars simply stepped around it. That is the part that should scare the tour. Because Rory was not skipping some forgotten week buried in the schedule. He was skipping Jack Nicklaus's event. He was skipping a signature event. He was skipping a tournament the PGA Tour had elevated specifically to make sure moments like this did not happen. The entire model was designed to make star absences rare, uncomfortable, and costly. But in 2025, the cost of missing one suddenly looked manageable. And once players understand that, the power balance changes. Because modern golfers are not just employees following a tour calendar, they are global brands. They manage bodies, families, sponsors, major championships, travel, mental fatigue, and legacies. A $20 million purse is enormous, but for players like Rory McIlroy, the most valuable currency is not always money. Sometimes it is rest. Sometimes it is control. Sometimes it is the right to say no. That is why Jack's surprise became bigger than Jack. The PGA Tour had built a golden cage and assumed the stars would stay inside because the cage was beautiful. But Rory's absence proved something uncomfortable. The new generation does not just chase the biggest check or the oldest handshake. They chase the schedule that serves them best. And if that becomes the rule, then the tour's entire star power promise starts to tremble. But the Rory decision did not stay trapped inside Muirfield Village. That is when the story became dangerous. Because once one superstar skips one of the PGA Tour's most protected events, the debate stops being personal and starts becoming structural. It was no longer just about whether Rory should have called Jack. It was about whether the PGA Tour had built a system that could actually guarantee what it was selling. Jay Monahan defended the idea of player freedom. In his view, the tour's strength was that players could build their own schedules, make their own choices, and manage their own seasons. That sounds reasonable. It sounds modern. It sounds like the kind of independence golfers have always valued. But in the middle of a fractured golf world, independence can start to look like uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison when sponsors are buying certainty. That is where the criticism hit hardest. If a signature event cannot promise the presence of every major star, then what exactly makes it signature? Is it the money, the field size, the FedEx Cup points, the branding? Because fans do not tune in for a logo. Sponsors do not pay for an idea. Broadcasters do not build drama around a tournament category. They need names. They need rivalries. They need the feeling that the best players have nowhere else more important to be. And that is why Rory's absence gave critics a weapon. It allowed them to point at the PGA Tour's model and ask the question out loud, has player freedom gone too far? The old version of golf let stars choose their own path because the calendar still had natural gravity. The biggest tournaments pulled the biggest players because tradition did the work. But now, with more money, more fatigue, more global options, and more personal brands, gravity is weaker than it used to be. So the model started cracking in public. Not because one player took a week off, but because that week exposed the gap between what the PGA Tour promises and what it can control. Jack Nicklaus felt the absence first. The field felt it next. But the warning was aimed at something much bigger. If the tour cannot guarantee its stars, then it cannot fully control its own product. And that is why this story was never really about one missed tournament. Rory McIlroy was the name that made everyone look. Jack Nicklaus was the legend who made everyone listen. But the warning was aimed at the future of the PGA Tour itself. Because when the Memorial Tournament can lose one of golf's biggest stars, the question is no longer about manners. It is about power. For decades, the PGA Tour lived on an unspoken agreement. The tournaments had history. The players respected that history. The fans trusted that the biggest names would appear when the stage was big enough. But 2025 revealed a new reality. History still matters. Money still matters. Jack Nicklaus still matters. But none of them automatically control the modern superstar anymore. That is the crack running through the entire system. The tour already seems to know change is coming. Bigger purses were not enough. Elevated events were not enough. Signature branding was not enough. Because the modern golf calendar is no longer built around one center of gravity. Majors pull one way, rest pulls another. Global opportunities pull another. Personal brands, sponsors, families, and legacy decisions all compete for space. And somewhere in the middle, the PGA Tour is trying to hold the whole thing together. That is what made Jack's surprise feel so heavy. He was not just reacting to Rory. He was standing at the collision point between two eras. One era believed tradition could summon the stars. The next era asks what the stars want before they commit to tradition. And once that shift happens, the sport cannot simply pretend the old rules still work. The silence at Muirfield Village was not empty. It was the sound of golf changing shape. So maybe the real warning was this: the PGA Tour cannot rely on nostalgia to protect its future. It cannot assume that a famous host, a giant purse, or a prestigious trophy will be enough by themselves. Jack Nicklaus was stunned by one absence, but what truly shook the golf world was what that absence revealed. The tour is no longer just fighting for tournaments, it is fighting for control of its own stars.